We're here today again with Rama, and today we wanted to talk about Mat Step 2. So we have already gone through Mat Step 1, so your dog already enjoys being on his mat and thinks of that as a nice, comfortable, safe place. So after that is established, we can move on to Mat Step 2. With Mat Step 2, we will have a trigger in the environment, or we can also have a setup with the trigger present, where we will have the trigger approach the dog, and when the trigger is near the dog, we are going to start rewarding to the mat, just like this, where we reward at a rapid rate after the dog sees the trigger. So the trigger will appear, the dog will see the trigger, we will start to reward the dog, and then when the trigger moves away, we'll stop rewarding the dog. So once again, every time a trigger approaches and the dog notices the trigger, we start to feed. And then when the trigger moves away, we stop feeding. So the dog starts to understand the connection with that when the trigger is present, he's going to get rewarded on his mat, and he's also going to remain safe on that mat. So we're going to show you two things here. I'm going to show you a first one, which is just a setup. You'll notice that Rama has already worked with this trigger, so he's not super concerned. But what we're going to do is when Rama sees my husband on the video move forward with the weed eater, I'm going to go ahead and start rewarding, and when he moves away, we'll stop rewarding. This can be used with any trigger, so if we wanted to make this harder, I could do this with a stranger or a stranger with a dog. We just want to make sure that we set a boundary with approaching so that they don't get too close for our dog to go over threshold. And then in the real world situation, if we were playing at a park, for example, and maybe a trigger such as a dog started to approach closely, we would wait till your dog noticed the trigger, start feeding while the trigger was close. So we would feed rapidly, and then once the trigger passed, we can stop feeding. So let's go ahead and see what that would look like. So go ahead and move up to the second one, and I'm going to start to feed him when you walk up. So he notices you, and then I'm going to feed him. Here we are out at the park. Rama just noticed somebody approaching with a baby carriage. So he noticed, and then we started feeding to the mat. And then once the person walks away to a reasonable distance, then we stop feeding. So Rama, you can see, just noticed somebody approaching. So we start feeding to the mat. We're going to continue to feed as they approach. You can see him noticing them, and then we feed to the mat. And then once they're past, we go ahead and stop feeding. What a good boy. Hello, we're back with Rama, and today we just wanted to show you Mat Step 3. Now remember that we've already done Mat Step 1 and 2, so your dog already feels comfortable and safe on his mat, and he already knows that when he sees and notices a trigger, he's going to start to get fed. So at this point, we're going to wait for the dog to look back at us before we start to feed. So once again, your dog is probably going to predict, because he's already done Step 2, that he's going to get fed when he sees a trigger. So if we see a trigger approach, such as a strange person or a strange dog, we're going to just wait a moment to see if our dog looks back at us. And if our dog looks back at us after he notices that trigger, we're going to go ahead and feed our dog. So let's go ahead and see what that would look like. Go ahead and walk up. Back up. And here's a real life example of Rama playing Mat Step 3 at the park. I'm here again with Rama, and today we wanted to show you mat step 4. So remember, he's already gone through the other steps of mat work, so he already knows that his mat is comfortable and safe. He already knows that when he sees a trigger that we are going to feed him, and he already has had some practice with looking back at us to be fed when that trigger is present. So now we can make this an operative game and add in the look at that cue. So we've probably already taught look at that at home with a neutral object, and now we can move to taking this out into the environment. So it's going to be easier to do when he's on his mat because he's going to feel secure and safe. And I lost my dog. But the way that we'll do this is the dog we will see a trigger out in the environment. We will cue look at that. The second our dog orients to that trigger, we're going to click and reward. So once again, the chain of events is that we will see something in the environment. We will cue the dog to look at that thing. We can also add a name to the thing, like look at that dog. The second he orients to it with either a head turn or also with an eye or an ear flick or any orientation that he notices that thing is there, we click and we reward the dog. Eventually our dog may just continue to look at us. That is completely fine as well, so we can still go ahead and reward him for being a good boy and looking at us. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like. You can go have one though. Look at that, good. Look at that, good. Look at that. Look at that, Mama. Look at that. Good boy. Where's Dad? There he is. Okay, you can back up.
And here is a real life example of Rama playing mat step 4 at the park. It's a little hard to hear in this clip, but in this clip we are pointing out the approaching dog in a cart. It's a novel thing of a dog in a red cart. We're going to point that out to him with look at that as it approaches. Here in this clip, a more excited dog approaches. We're going to point him out using look at that as he walks past. And here we're going to cue, look at that, just to point out that somebody is coming up behind us, so Rama does not get startled.